Welcome back to our presentation on ethics in journalism. In the first part of this presentation, we defined the study of ethics and used the trolley problem to make a few challenging ethical decisions. In doing so, we touched on all 5 of the ethical principles that we'll focus on during this course. We'll now conclude the presentation by taking a more detailed look at these principles and their relevance to you as a journalist. We've already defined ethics itself as a system of determining or evaluating what is considered right or wrong. Now think of ethical principles as varied schools of thought within a broad field. Each principle gives us a specific approach to determining what action can be considered right or wrong in a given situation. Some principles are more relevant to certain situations than others. We'll go through each one with reference to the choices you made in response to the trolley problem. For more in-depth information on the principles and the minds behind them, please take a look at the PDF summary sheets that have been uploaded to the eClassroom. According to the principle of utility, the most ethical course of action is one that provides the greatest happiness for the greatest number. If you decided to sacrifice one person to the trolley in order to save 5, you took a utilitarian approach to the problem. You might have heard this principle referred to as the greater good for the greater number. Now it's very important to point out that the greatest happiness is not necessarily determined by the greatest number. If, for example, 100 people in the trolley were delayed while you freed the 5 tied up on the tracks, the unhappiness that the 100 passengers experience for arriving to their destinations late would not outweigh the unhappiness that the 5 captives experience for dying. It's important for you to weigh the consequences of your actions as a reporter in this regard. Sometimes you have to decide whether you want to publish a story or photograph that will cause severe distress to a few individuals, but possibly be beneficial to society as a whole. Consider the greater good. As its name indicates, the golden mean is concerned with a middle state. It encourages us to identify and avoid the extreme solutions to any dilemma. If you chose to derail the train and cause injuries instead of death, you adhered to the golden mean. The most frequently encountered extremes in journalism are non-coverage or sensational reporting. The commercial concerns of modern newspapers virtually dictate one of those two approaches to big stories. Adhering to the golden mean is seldom as simple as performing or not performing an action. Avoiding extremes often means taking a creative approach to a given dilemma, such as taking a potentially graphic photograph from a less sensational angle, or revealing only partial details of an individual's identity. The categorical imperative is a rather rigid ethical principle that takes a black and white approach to determining wrong or right. It states that the right action is the one that can be performed ethically under any circumstance. It disregards possible consequences and focuses on established codes of conduct. If you refuse to cause the death of the single captive or the man on the bridge because you consider either action tantamount to murder, you are adhering to the categorical imperative. Basically, you're saying that killing someone isn't right in different circumstances, so it shouldn't be done here either. It seems heartless or impractical, but the principle argues that moral actions do not derive value from the expected consequences. Kant's categorical imperative is best applied with regard to your professional duty as a journalist. It's more concerned with what you are supposed to do than with the possible or subjective results of your actions. According to the imperative, performing your stated duties and adhering to the rules and regulations of your profession are the key to ethical conduct. The veil of ignorance is a figurative cover that forces us to disregard social differentiations and personal attributes when making decisions. This ignorance applies not only to the social identities of the people who you write about, but to your own social standing as well. The principle works on the idea that someone who is unaware of where he or she stands in a society is less likely to make a decision that only benefits one segment of society. In practical terms, the veil of ignorance asks us not to base our decisions on factors such as race, gender, social class, religion, sexuality, or prominence. We noted that the man on the bridge is a wealthy foreign businessman. If his identity influenced your decision to push him or not push him, then you illustrated the issue at the core of this principle. Now, ignoring social differentiations is obviously a contentious idea in a profession that is mandated to pay particular attention to the activities of those in power. However, the veil can be very useful in forcing us to question our motives for covering particular stories or angles. It helps us distinguish between reasonable attention to social differences and unnecessary attention that is motivated by our own personal biases or prejudices. If you are willing to risk your own life to help rescue the captives, you demonstrated a care for the welfare of others at the center of our final principle. Other regarding care is based on the maxim known in Judeo-Christian thinking as the Golden Rule. It's concerned primarily with selflessness and compassion, and it sees the nurturing of others as an end in itself. It's the simplest of the principles we've covered, and it tends to be the least challenging to apply to specific dilemmas. Its real use is as a guiding philosophy that is consistently adhered to by journalists and by news providers. The categorical imperative is a rather rigid ethical principle that takes a black and white approach to determining wrong or right. It states that the right action is the one that can be performed ethically under any circumstance. It disregards possible consequences and focuses on established codes of conduct. Take note, however, that these aren't the only factors you need to consider when making an ethical decision. In the next presentation, we'll look at those other factors when I introduce you to the Potter Box system of ethical reasoning. In the meanwhile, visit the forum and join the discussion on ethical principles. See you next week.